Stay quiet, I think.
The footage you just saw was taken at the exact moment Christopher Gregor realized police finally knew what had happened to his son. One horrifying and heartbreaking secret recording had changed Christopher's life forever. Police became involved in the situation when Corey was admitted to the hospital in critical condition. Corey just wanted to impress his father and keep him happy. But the father had more sinister intentions towards his own son.
Hey, Gma, does God see what my daddy does to me?
All his evil secrets were about to be revealed, and they would shock the entire community.
I told him God sees everything.
On April 2nd, 2021, just days after the disturbing footage of Corey running alone on the treadmill, a tragedy occurred. Christopher Gregor, 31, Corey's father, discovered his son unconscious and completely motionless around 4 p.m. the following day. Corey was immediately taken to Southern Ocean County Medical Center in Stafford, where he was examined by professional doctors. Inside the room, a battle had begun to save the child. Despite the doctors' quick and dedicated efforts, Corey's condition worsened. During a CT scan, he suffered a seizure that further complicated his fragile state. Despite every attempt to save him, Corey passed away at 5:03 p.m. on April 2nd, 2021. But the doctors were about to find something even more horrific. As they examined Corey, they discovered numerous bruises on his body. The treadmill video also hinted at something sinister and almost answered what could have led to such a tragic outcome. The investigation that would uncover some shocking details that would leave the whole community stunned. But there was another surprising twist in the case. Right after the doctor had pronounced Corey dead, his father, Christopher, made a call to Child Protection Services. He reported that on April 1st, 2021, Corey had been with his mother, Brianna Micciolo. She quickly became the center of a growing investigation. However, some details from the history of how his parents raised him would end up revealing a sinister pattern. In 2014, the story began with Corey's mother, Brianna Micciolo, getting pregnant with Corey. The father was Christopher Gregor. Initially, Christopher was unaware of Corey's existence. It was when Brianna applied for state assistance that the authorities first learned about Christopher as Corey's possible father. In 2018, a paternity test confirmed that Christopher was indeed Corey's father. This marked the beginning of a custody battle between the parents, despite them not being divorced, as they'd never married to begin with. Both wanted to take responsibility for Corey's upbringing. As the custody battle unfolded, Christopher started complying with child support orders, although it took nearly a year for him to begin visiting Corey. Later, the custody arrangement was settled in court, granting Christopher custody of Corey on weekdays. Ultimately, they lived with Christopher's parents in Monroe, but later, Christopher moved to Barnegat. Brianna initially agreed with this decision, believing it was important for Corey to have a relationship with his father, hoping it would provide a sense of completeness to his life. But this decision would change her life forever. As Corey began spending more time with his father, Brianna noticed some unusual things. On one occasion, when Corey returned home from his father's custody, Brianna noticed he had a busted lip. When she asked Christopher about it, he claimed it had happened accidentally during a soccer game. It was only a moment of time before the horrifying truth of the situation would come to light. However, that wasn't the only incident. Around Halloween 2019, another incident occurred when Brianna noticed injuries on Corey's face, arms, and legs shortly after he returned from Christopher's home. Corey also had a visible mark on his face. When Brianna asked Corey about it, he was too scared to say anything. But Brianna quickly realized that it was none other than Christopher himself who was torturing his own son. She knew something was terribly wrong, so she decided to take action to ensure his safety. She'd reported Christopher's behavior to the police and the Division of Child Protection and Permanency, or DCPP, but the authorities didn't take any action regarding the complaints. Despite all of Brianna's efforts, the case was closed without any action. This was just the start of a pattern where the authorities ignored Brianna's concerns.
You said something like, the more he did it, the worse it got. That pattern of
Yeah, the more he
escalation.
got away with it. Yeah, he would get away with it. And he was noticing, like, I'm doing this to him. DCPMP obviously can't tell, or they just don't care. So everyone sees you as like this crazy person because you're screaming at cops, you're screaming at DCPMP. They don't like you because you're screaming at them. But you're like, what do I need to do?
I mean, this is what I call, Brie, where women can't win, because if you didn't take him, then you would be neglectful. And then when you do take him, you're trying to alienate him from his father, and the deck is stacked against you.
Immediately after her complaints, Christopher accused Brianna of being addicted to drugs and sought full custody of Corey. By March 2020, Christopher was granted sole custody of Corey by the court, and Brianna was left with only visitation rights. Even after losing the battle for custody of Corey, Brianna didn't give up. She documented multiple instances of unexplained bruises and even bite marks on Corey's body. She repeatedly alerted the caseworker from State Child Protective Services, but her pleas mostly fell on deaf ears. Corey often came home with fingerprint marks on his arms and legs, and once with blood pooling at the bottom of his eyes. His father's abuse continued, and years passed without any significant action from the authorities. Despite Brianna's complaints to the authorities, Christopher still had full custody. However, everything changed on April 1st, 2021, with a heartbreaking discovery. During a visit with Corey, he informed his mother about an incident involving the treadmill. He revealed that weeks earlier, his father had forced him to run at an unusually high speed. CCTV footage also recorded what had happened that day. The footage captured Christopher and Corey entering the Atlantic Heights Clubhouse Fitness Center on March 20th, 2021. The video showed Christopher forcing Corey onto the treadmill and then increasing the difficulty settings even after the boy fell multiple times. But this wasn't even the most heartbreaking part. Christopher believed his son was overweight, hence he should work out rigorously. It was clearly seen how Christopher abused his son, Corey. Shocked by Corey's statement about his father, Brianna had taken immediate action the following day. She applied for emergency custody of Corey and reported the abuse to authorities. But there was yet another letdown. Despite her urgent pleas, the family court judge denied Brianna's request, stating that there was no immediate danger to Corey. Little did they know the danger was just around the corner. However, on the same day, around the afternoon of April 1st, 2021, Brianna took him to a nearby hospital to get his bruises checked. Doctors examined Corey and assured Brianna that he was okay, though he had a few bruises on his body. Therefore, he was charged around 1 a.m. the same day from the hospital. Brianna wanted to keep Corey with her, but Christopher insisted on taking him back the following day on April 2nd, 2021, around 9 a.m. That day changed everything. Corey became severely ill and unresponsive while under Christopher's care on April 2nd. Christopher had rushed Corey to the hospital around 4 p.m., but tragically, after a few hours, Corey was pronounced dead. What shocked everyone even more was Christopher's reaction. Christopher blamed Brianna for Corey's death. He just lost his son, and to be playing blame games right after the tragedy seemed rather odd. But this was just the beginning. There were more twists to come in the story. Instead of mourning his son, immediately after hearing the news of Corey's death, he left the state for 3 months. When the police caught him, he again attempted to shift blame onto Corey's mother, Brianna. When Brianna received the news of her son's death, she was devastated. She felt overwhelming sorrow and regret for every decision that had led to Corey being under his father's care, which turned into a horrifying outcome in the end.
And sometimes I just want to say sorry, but I know I tried.
Because that happened a few times. Like, that video wasn't the first time it happened.
But she was determined to get justice for Corey with the help of the law. Finally, the trial began to determine the reason behind Corey Micciolo's death on April 30th, 2024. The prosecution, led by Christine Lento, opened the trial, stating that they'd sufficient evidence to accuse Christopher of murdering his son, Corey. Lento confidently argued that Corey's death was a result of consistent abuse done by his father. On the other hand, Christopher's attorney, Mario Gallucci, countered these claims by portraying Christopher as a responsible father. Gallucci argued that the footage from the treadmill had nothing to do with Corey's death.
At some point, you're going to see Christopher go over to that treadmill and speed it up. And you're going to see Corey fall. And you're going to see him pick that boy up 6 times. And 6 times put him back on the treadmill. And I'm going to tell you right now, you're not going to like him. And I don't care if you like him. When you see that video, you're going to be horrified. You're going to be mortified. But I'm telling you right now that the evidence you're going to see of Corey's death had absolutely nothing to do with that treadmill.
Corey and his mom sat in the car in the parking lot, and they said goodbye for what would be the very last time. Corey was walking. Corey was talking. Corey was fine, except for his bruises. By 9:03 a.m., Corey was back inside the defendant's apartment. By 3:48 p.m., this defendant carried Corey's nearly limp body into Southern Ocean Medical Center. He reported that Corey was sleepy and had thrown up. Corey was admitted quickly. He was brought to room 6 in the emergency department. Corey coded. He was intubated. He coded again. He lost his pulse. And by 5:03 p.m., Corey was pronounced dead.
Dr. Larkin found that Corey's blood results from Southern Ocean showed incredibly high white blood count, high glucose, and high lactic acid, and said that's all indicative of caused by an infection.
Corey was alive and well at 9 a.m. when he was with his mom, and he was gone by 5:03 p.m. after only being with his father, this defendant. The state submits that after you've heard and seen all of the evidence in this case, you will be firmly convinced that this defendant is guilty of abuse and murder. Because healthy don't just die during the course of a business day, and neither did Corey Micciolo.
And instead suggested that Corey died from sepsis, an infection discovered during a medical examination. The case presented differing opinions about the cause of Corey's death, setting the stage for a courtroom battle. This legal showdown took an interesting turn as witnesses testified and evidence was presented. At first, the case began to demonstrate Christopher's abuse towards his son. The prosecutor had called Corey's first-grade teacher as their first witness. The teacher testified that after March 2021, when Corey was under his father's custody, she often noticed bruises on his body.
Did you first see Corey that day?
In the classroom.
Did you make any observations of him?
I saw kind of like a burn, not a burn, but like it looked like kind of like a rug burn thing on his forehead.
And virtually?
Virtually.
And were you able to see him virtually?
I was.
And what, if any, observations did you make of Corey when you saw him virtually on March 29th?
I saw bruises on his cheek.
Is that the same as what you were describing from March 23rd?
No, that.
And did Corey attend school virtually on March 30th?
Yes.
Did you observe him?
Yes.
What, if any, observations did you make?
The bruising.
Additionally, she observed a noticeable change in Corey's behavior at school. He'd become more withdrawn and quiet. These observations were presented to illustrate the potential mistreatment Corey experienced while in his father's care. Furthermore, Dr. Yi Kia-ong appeared before the jury and provided his testimony regarding Corey's visit to him with his mother on April 1st, 2021.
Who brought Corey to the emergency room?
His mother.
And what was the chief complaint when Corey arrived?
Patient has some bruises all over the body. They want to find out where those bruises come from. He was very scary, little bit scary boy, and he afraid to answer my questions. We marked down all over the body, and we saw like some bruises, abrasion. The most significant one is on the chest bone area, like about 5 by 5 centimeter.
You tell the jurors what your impression was regarding the bruising that you observed to Corey's body on April 1st when you had observed him in the emergency room.
Some bleeding underneath of the skin for like a few hours to a few days.
And what other impressions did you have regarding the bruising?
Those bruises are in various stages, as I mentioned before. Some of them are maybe hours, some of them are maybe days. I cannot tell you exactly more than that.
And Corey was discharged a little after 1 a.m., correct?
Yes.
So he would have been discharged then on the early morning hours of April 2nd.
Yes.
Of 2021.
Yes.
And when you discharged Corey from the hospital, did you observe any symptoms of sickness or infection or broken bones or any of these things?
No.
Dr. Ong explained that he observed bruises all over Corey's body, particularly on his chest area, and noted marks indicating bleeding beneath the skin. When questioned by the prosecutor whether he observed the symptoms of sepsis when Corey was discharged, Dr. Ong confirmed that he did not. This testimony strongly suggested that Corey did not die as a result of an infection. Dr. Yi Kia-ong's testimony also indicated that Corey appeared to be in good health before visiting his father's place on April 2nd, 2021, suggesting that something might have occurred during the time Corey was under his father's care. To clarify Corey's condition after visiting his father, another witness called to testify was William Doyle, a triage nurse at Southern Ocean Medical Center. Doyle provided his account of seeing Christopher bring Corey into the emergency room on April 2nd, 2021, shedding light on Corey's medical state upon arrival at the hospital.
Corey was in Chris's arms. His arms were over Chris's shoulders. His legs were dangling. His arms did not look like they had much movement to them. His legs did not look like they had much movement to him. His head was rested on Chris's shoulder. His face was difficult to visualize. So when I first approached them, I knew that something was concerning, but I couldn't see everything I needed to see. So I was depending on Chris to convey a sense of urgency or unwellness that I did not get from him at first. It was more of a clinical description of what was going on, and I did not immediately feel I had to rush them back. I definitely knew it was concerning, but I needed just a little more information. If I saw Corey's face right away, it would have been much easier, but Corey's face was on Chris's shoulder.
The prosecutor asked Dr. William Doyle what his immediate observations were upon seeing Corey. Dr. Doyle recalled,
So I went over to them, and I was splitting my attention between Chris and Corey. What I could tell was that there wasn't a lot of spontaneous movement from Corey. He was not really moving on his own. He appeared to have a lack of tone to his muscles, and there was a lot of support coming from Chris in keeping him in the position that he was in.
These statements justified Corey's severe and critical condition upon arriving at the hospital. To counter the accusations, The defense lawyer invited Christopher's mother, Carolyn Gregor, to testify about the phone call she received from Christopher regarding Corey and why he decided to flee immediately. Initially, Carolyn explained that she'd heard about Corey's health.
Because he was lethargic, something's wrong with him. Something's wrong, has to take him, you know.
She mentioned that Christopher had suggested that Brianna might have done something wrong to Corey. Then she went on to explain that they started receiving random threatening calls accusing Christopher of being a murderer.
He's getting phone calls at the house, on our house phone. Threats. People are, your brother's a murderer. You know, this was like, it was ridiculous how quickly.
So when you talk about how quickly, I'm trying to develop a time frame.
Yeah.
Were you and Mr. Gregor in the vehicle that you were driving to Southern Ocean Methodist when you see that?
Yeah, I believe so. You know, it's like the whole thing was we were devastated. We're crying in the car. We're calling the police in the car because no one was there. There was no police, nobody. So we're calling the police. We're trying to find out what's going on. At some point, we get to the hospital, and no. And Danny calls us again.
This was the reason Christopher decided to flee. Christopher's mother also mentioned that Brianna had visited their house and threatened them. However, when questioned by the judge, Carolyn clarified that Brianna never made threats to burn their house or assault them.
I have a couple things to ask you to clarify. Danny's calling you while you and your husband are on the way to Southern Ocean County, right?
Yes.
And then Danny later calls you again that same night to tell you that Rebecca Micciolo showed up at the house.
Yes.
And you're saying that she's making threats.
Yes.
Except what you're really saying is she's saying Christopher's going to be charged with murder, right?
And she was saying things along the line, and I'm paraphrasing, that you people are going to watch it, and just crazy stuff, saying crazy stuff like that.
And was there a threat to burn down your house?
No.
Or to assault you?
No.
Assault your husband?
Not directly, no.
And the wanted posters are that he's wanted for murder?
Yes.
She only explained that her mention of Brianna making threatening calls was in reference to the treadmill video. Further, attorney Mario Gallucci introduced David Gregor, Christopher's father, and a retired New Jersey State Police officer who testified about meeting Corey for the first time. This testimony highlighted the emotional aspect of Christopher's parents. David appeared visibly emotional when discussing his only grandson, Corey.
Corey's first visit was in the beginning of August of 2019. It was just a visit for a couple hours. I remember it because Christopher went to pick him up. And it was a big day for us. It was my only grandson. He came for a couple-hour visit, and the preparation, everything at the house was about Corey. I remember going through I had 4 children, they all played sports, so I was going through all the old equipment now that the children were older and pulling out all kinds of balls and baseballs and footballs. And
when the defense lawyer asked about the treadmill video footage, David stated that he chose not to watch it because he didn't want it to be his last memory of Corey. However, he didn't deny that Christopher mistreated Corey in the treadmill video. In this way, attorney Mario Gallucci vigorously defended Christopher, but all the facts and statements became groundless when prosecutor Christine Lento presented the most crucial evidence, the manner of death, which led to the conclusion that Christopher was responsible for his son's death.
Corey died of blunt impact injuries of the chest and abdomen, with laceration of the heart, left pulmonary contusion, and laceration and contusion of the liver. In Corey's case, in that these injuries could not have been inflicted by himself with any kind of intent, it's certainly not. These injuries, given their pattern and distribution, are consistent with having been inflicted by another person. Therefore, any death that is related to the actions of another person is, from a medical examiner's standpoint, from an epidemiological or public health standpoint, homicide.
Dr. Thomas Andrew provided critical testimony indicating that Corey's fatal injuries were the result of unforced trauma to his chest and abdomen, which led to a significant laceration of the heart. His expert analysis unequivocally classified Corey's death as a homicide, emphasizing that the severity of these injuries pointed to deliberate human actions rather than accidental causes. He also mentioned that there was no sign of sepsis infection during the forensic test.
There's zero, not one scintilla of evidence of sepsis or any other infectious process in Corey's autopsy.
But this battle didn't end there. There was another testimony left. Another forensic pathologist, Dr. Michael Baden, presented a contrasting view to the Ocean County jurors. Dr. Baden asserted that Corey had died from natural causes, like complications from pneumonia.
Also based my opinion on is the CAT scan finding of pneumonia also present. So I think all together, the most likely cause of death was a very severe, rapid pneumonia. There are other causes that could also occur.
This testimony directly contradicted Dr. Andrews' findings and interpretation. The conflicting experts' opinions added complexity to the case, prompting jurors to carefully weigh the evidence presented by both sides in Christopher Gregor's trial. Despite arguments from the defense that Corey died of natural causes, such as pneumonia or sepsis, Linto stated that the treadmill video, recovered by the prosecutor's office, spoke for itself. Everything the jury needed to know was captured in that video. May 31st, 2024 marked the final day of judgment to determine whether Christopher was guilty or not after considering all the evidence presented by both the prosecutor and defense lawyer. Finally, the jury reached their verdict. Christopher was found guilty of aggravated manslaughter and endangering the welfare of a child.
Corey was subjected to an awful time on the treadmill that I've described. It was brutal to watch that treadmill video because you rarely see a child essentially inflict harm on himself in the beginning until his father starts to put him back on it. So it doesn't take a vivid imagination to consider the fear Corey's in at that point. Aggravated manslaughter count run first, followed by the flat sentence on the endangering count, such that the aggregate sentence is 25 years and that the jail credit of 885 days comes off the aggregate sentence. Another condition of the No Early Release Act is that defendant shall serve a 5-year period of parole supervision upon release, that he shall provide a DNA sample and pay for the cost of same. There are 2 $50 victim of crime compensation assessments, 2 $75 safe neighborhood assessments, 1 $30 law enforcement training and equipment fee.
But they dismissed the more severe murder charge against him of aggravated manslaughter, which carried a potential prison sentence of 10 to 30 years. However, if he was convicted of murder, Christopher could have been sentenced to life in prison. With this decision of the jury, the courtroom erupted with mixed emotions: relief and closure for some, sorrow and disbelief for others. Sentencing was set for August 2nd, 2024, where the full extent of Christopher's punishment would be determined. Meanwhile, amidst the criminal proceedings, another battle unfolded in civil court. Brianna Micciolo, Corey's mother, took action against the DCPP, alleging that their inaction and negligence had failed to protect Corey from the abuse that ultimately led to his death. Brianna's efforts to make changes gained strength as she received support from advocacy groups and people who cared about her cause. Corey Micciolo's story remains a somber reminder of the vulnerabilities faced by children and the collective responsibility to protect them. But it begs the question, was the right decision made by the jury?